In the first half of the 20th century, the world changed faster and more dramatically than it had in, well, maybe 50 generations. Today, we're going to dig into A.C. Ward's analysis of this incredible time of upheaval, a period that was defined by both absolutely breathtaking progress and, at the same time, staggering regress. And we'll see how literature tried to make sense of it all.
Okay, so to really get this, you first have to understand what the 20th century was pushing back against. You see, the Victorians, they saw their world as this house built on unshakable foundations. Things like the empire, religion, the family, they were seen as totally permanent. But the 20th century mind? It saw something completely different. Not stability, but constant change. What H.G. Wells famously called the flow of things. Certainty was out, questioning was in. And that old belief in authority, it gave way to a powerful spirit of revolt.
So, what was the engine behind this massive shift? Well, at its heart, it was the scientific revolution. But, as A.C. Ward argues, this was a classic dual-edged sword. It seems like for every incredible step forward in mastering the physical world, there was this corresponding step backward in the moral and spiritual world.
I mean, just think about the internal combustion engine. All of a sudden, the motor car gave millions of people, especially young people, this freedom they'd never even dreamed of. You could travel far from home, completely escaping the traditional control of your parents.
And then you have the other edge of the sword. That exact same technology that gave us all that freedom also made the airplane and the tank possible. It created the tools for industrialized slaughter on a scale nobody could have ever imagined. And that right there, that's the central paradox of the century: progress and regress, born from the very same source.
And this wasn't just one revolution, it was like a whole series of them, all tangled up together. That newfound freedom of the youth, it could be twisted and channeled into huge political movements. The ease of travel basically ended Britain's traditional isolation. And in the factories, the assembly line spelled the death of individual craftsmanship. The old world was literally being taken apart piece by piece.
So, with all this chaos, how in the world did literature respond? Well, it developed a new creed, and it was championed by people like the playwright George Bernard Shaw. That old Victorian habit of just, accepting what you're told, that was over. The new mission for writers and thinkers was to question everything, examine every single belief, and test every last institution. And this was the trumpet call. This line from Shaw's play Major Barbara was absolutely electrifying for a new generation. The logic was so simple but so powerful. If we're smart enough to get rid of our outdated machines, why on earth are we still clinging to outdated ideas about morality, religion, and society? But here's the thing. For every person who was energized by that call, there was someone else who felt like this. This is the voice of Barbara from the very same play. For her, and for so many others, all this constant questioning didn't feel like freedom. It felt like the solid ground right under their feet was just turning to dust. And this gets us to the most important question of all. When you tear down all the old certainties, what are you supposed to replace them with? For most people, this revolt against Victorianism didn't lead to some brand new, shiny philosophy. It just created a profound spiritual vacuum. Now, this vacuum had a massive effect on literature. It started to splinter, to break apart. Writers weren't speaking to one big public anymore. Instead, this huge gap opened up between the literary elites and the average, common reader. You can almost watch it happen in stages. First, you had writers like Shaw and Wells, who were part of the politically active Fabian Society. They believed in art for life's sake, that literature should be a tool for social change. Then you get groups like the Bloomsbury Circle, and they shift back to art for art's sake, focusing on beauty and aesthetics. And finally, the high modernists like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot, they took it even further, basically retreating into their own world to create incredibly complex work for a tiny intellectual audience. The year 1922 was a real turning point, mainly because of Joyce's Ulysses and Eliot's The Waste Land. Before then, the big-name authors wrote on what Ward calls the high road of communication. Their work was accessible to just about everyone. But after 1922, the most influential literature pulled back into an esoteric fastness, a private world, really, just for a select few. And make no mistake, this wasn't an accident. It was a philosophy. This new intellectualism was rooted in a genuine contempt for the average reader. As T.S. Eliot himself wrote, the very idea that literature should be for everyone was something that just flattered the half-educated. Art wasn't a public square anymore. It was a fortress.
All right, let's jump forward now to the years after the Second World War. Britain had become a welfare state. The government had these grand plans for social security, full employment, and a better life for everybody. But this new age of affluence, it brought its own set of really strange paradoxes. So the thinking was pretty simple. If you remove all the economic stress from people's lives, you'll create a happier, more content society. But the reality was, well, it was completely different. Ward describes this mood of sullen discontent, where crime was on the rise and a lot of young people just felt culturally and socially lost. The big takeaway? Turns out, material security is not the key to happiness. In this new world, a new social force really took hold. It's called conspicuous waste. The act of buying and showing off stuff to prove your status. That used to be something only the super rich did. But now, with more money to go around and the rise of consumer credit, keeping up with the Joneses basically became a national sport. And of course, advertisers were quick to exploit this. Selling a product wasn't about its quality anymore. No, it became all about psychology. Ads were specifically designed to trigger an automatic emotional response, linking a product not to what it does, but to these deep subconscious desires for things like love, status, or identity. So how did art respond to all this? Well, it held up a mirror. With all the old values gone and this new consumerism trying to fill that spiritual void, a lot of art in the 1950s just threw traditional craftsmanship out the window. Ward calls it anti-art, work that actually embraced the fragmentation and the seeming meaninglessness of the times. So, as we pull back and we look at the whole first half of the 20th century, what's the final verdict? A.C. Ward really presents it as a massive trade-off. There were incredible gains, for sure, but they came at an equally incredible cost. So here it is, the century's balance sheet. On one side, humanity gained immense material progress, social security, and incredible individual freedom. But look at what was lost in the process: spiritual stability, shared values, the pride of true craftsmanship, and that belief in a permanent, stable world. It was a revolution that gave people more than they ever had before, but somehow left them feeling more adrift. And that leaves us with this final thought. In tearing down the old world to build a new one, did we lose just as much as we gained? It is the central question this whole turbulent period forces us to ask, and it's one that honestly still echoes today. Is progress always a zero-sum game?